It would affect him quite negatively. This is a little boy who understands everything that's being said to him, but is struggling at an extreme level to be able to communicate and be understood. This level of frustration exists in one language, in learning one language. To expect him to be able to learn in two would be unfair to him and would increase the amount of frustration, would increase the negative impact on his self-esteem, and would then potentially get in the way of, in my opinion, of learning, of becoming successful in learning to speak English.
Jessica, you've actually gone as far as using the word cruel, saying it would be cruel for Gray to be introduced to French next fall. Why do you say that?
Because of the two key pieces around frustration and self-esteem. When you're putting a child into a learning situation, it's already going to be difficult for him, as I've explained. This is a child who needs intensive speech therapy. He's in speech therapy twice a week. This is going to go on for years for him to learn to speak properly. When you put him then in a situation where you're expecting something of him that he isn't even able to do in his mother tongue, that's cruel, because you're asking more of him than he is capable of doing at this point.
In a way, I mean, I know he's your son, so I don't want to take that away from you, but how do you know that he will not be able to adapt to French immersion?
I don't know what the future will hold, but we're talking about, in a few months from now, him going into school, the year after that. It's going to take years for him to learn to speak properly. The outcome is uncertain, whether he ever will speak fully in English. And so at this point, it certainly is not the right choice for him.
What angers you most about this proposal?
I would say it's the fact there's two pieces. The one is that they're removing the option of English with core French for parents like myself, and of course my son is only one
so
of
can I get double tall
many children with
cappuccino with
special
3.5
needs for whom
sugars?
bilingual kindergarten is not appropriate.
Yeah.
But also the way it's been rushed.
That's
the
about
lack
it.
of consultation.
Right.
And until very recently, there was absolutely nothing being said in the proposed changes, now voted in, speaking specifically to how they're going to accommodate him, completely to looking into private schools. But these are options that many parents don't have. Either both parents work, the financial resources are not there for private options. And so what ends up happening is that children like my son won't be given the full range of educational choices that are being available to other children.
Jessica, when we last spoke in Ottawa, as you were leaving the studio, you told me that you're not the type to get up and stand up and really voice your fight for things.
Range of learning needs, including the types of needs that the parent that was speaking has for her son. And we had an early learning team from special education that is made up of speech pathologists and educational assistants, and they developed resources for children with communication disorders to really be able to help support them in a bilingual environment. Those resources are being expanded to make sure that we have them available in all of our schools, and the number of people on that team is being expanded to ensure that in schools that have children that have these types of needs, these people can be coming in and helping the teaching staff to make sure that they are accommodating for these types of children in our schools. We already have that.
What do you think of this idea of making all kindergarten classrooms bilingual?
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for including me in this discussion. There's two sides to this issue. Very clearly, there's a political side, and there's also a more scientific side, and I'm much more comfortable and competent to speak to the scientific side, and that's really the issue of, are there limits on the suitability of immersion for students who might have special learning needs, which is really the concern that we've heard from both the school district and from parent, and I'm sure other parents have this concern. Mm-hmm. There has been research on children in immersion programs and other kinds of bilingual programs who have special needs, developmental disorders, language impairment, reading impairment. There's not as much of this research as we would like, and there's not research on certain kinds of difficulties, but for the most part, the research that has been done has shown that children who have learning difficulties related to language learning or reading acquisition and attention and so forth and so on, that these children generally do as well in immersion programs or bilingual programs as comparable children in an English-only program. In other words, because the fear is, as you heard from the parent, and it's an understandable concern, that children with language learning difficulties will be at greater risk in a bilingual program than a monolingual one. But so far, the research that's there, it's not complete, as I said, but the research we have suggests that even children with these kinds of difficulties can become bilingual within the limits of their kinds of factors. There's no reason to think that boys in the long run are any less competent than girls in learning a language. But in a school context, you have other factors that start to influence how successful children are.
Fred, just lastly, you say that you would tell a parent that the biggest risk is the parent's own attitude towards French immersion. What do you mean by that?
Well, children around the world grow up learning any language, and most children around the world probably learn more than one language. Immigrant children come to Canada all the time. We have an influx of refugees. All of those children are going to learn French and or English, and probably maintain their own language, Arabic, I guess, in many cases. When there's a strong motivation on the part of the children and their parents, then they take it as natural that they will acquire an additional language. I think where young children can run into difficulties in learning another language is when the motivation or their attitude or motivation or that of their parents is not favorable towards that situation.
Interesting conversation. Fred, thanks very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
That's Fred Genesee. He's a language acquisition expert in the Department of Psychology at Montreal's McGill. On Twitter, we are at The Current CBC, or you can send us an email through our website, cbc.ca/thecurrent. Coming up next, it's the CBC News. Then it's the Battle of the Titans, Apple versus the FBI, and the stakes couldn't be higher.
This is CBC Radio 1, 740 AM and 93.9 FM in Edmonton.
It could be an environmental disaster. There are reports of a helium leak at the Helium Corporation in Helium, Ontario. The intrepid Irrelevant Show news team is all over this fast-breaking story.
We go now to Helium Corp headquarters in Helium, Ontario.
There has been no helium leak.
The Irrelevant Show, tomorrow afternoon at 1:30, 2 in Newfoundland.
The CBC News is next. Coming up in an hour, it's Q.
Hey, what's up? I'm Shad. Marlon James won the Booker Prize for his novel A Brief History of Seven Killings.